He had 20,000 men, 20,000 rifles, 20,000 pairs of boots, 20,000 men who wanted to go home. And he was about to sign away every single one of them. His name was General Karl Bremer. And on a gray September morning in 1944, surrounded by enemy lines, with his back against a river his men could not cross, he sat in a farmhouse and wrote the most dangerous letter of his life. It wasn't a battle plan. It wasn't a desperate plea for supplies. It was a surrender offer. Under the laws of the Third Reich, what Bremer was doing was treason. If that letter was ever found by the wrong eyes, his own side's eyes, he would be executed. Not on the battlefield, against a wall, by a firing squad made up of his own countrymen. But that wasn't what terrified him most. What terrified him most was this. What if the Americans said yes, but didn't keep their word? What happened next is one of the most overlooked stories of World War II. A German general in an impossible position. An American commander who made a choice that no one expected. And a surrender that, in a single morning, removed 20,000 soldiers from the war, without a single shot fired. This is that story. To understand why Karl Bremer did what he did, you have to understand the world that was collapsing around him. 6 weeks earlier, everything had seemed manageable. Germany still held France. The Atlantic Wall was supposed to hold the Allies on the beaches. German commanders told themselves, told their men, that the defenses would break the invasion. It didn't. After the Allied breakout from Normandy in late July 1944, American armor didn't just push east. It erupted. General Marcus Hale's Third Army, one of the most aggressive fighting forces in American military history, moved so fast that German commanders were receiving reports of Americans in towns they thought were still safely behind their own lines. It was like trying to hold back a flood with your hands. Within weeks, entire German formations were simply left behind, cut off. The front had moved so quickly that tens of thousands of soldiers woke up one morning to find there was no longer a German front to retreat to. Karl Bremer was one of those men. His force, roughly 20,000 troops, was not an elite panzer division. They were garrison soldiers, occupation troops, men who had been stationed in western France to hold territory, to run supply depots, to keep order in a country that deeply hated them. They were not equipped for the kind of fight they now faced. In Bremer's command tent, the maps told a story no one wanted to read aloud. The Lier River was behind them, too wide, too deep, no bridges in German hands. American armored columns controlled every road east. French resistance fighters were picking off isolated patrols in the forests and small towns. Allied aircraft owned the sky, and any large movement of troops would be spotted within minutes and bombed within hours. Bremer held 3 options. Fight east. This was suicide. Without armor support and with American air dominance, his infantry columns would be destroyed on open roads before they traveled 20 miles. Disperse. Break into small groups, blend into the countryside, fight as guerrillas. This extended the dying without changing the outcome. His men would be hunted by American soldiers and French partisans, and the French had 4 years of reasons to hate them, or surrender. In the Third Reich of 1944, surrender was not a military option. It was a crime. Hitler's infamous "stand fast" orders had been codified into something uglier. Any commander who gave up a position, who chose the lives of his men over the ideology, was subject to court-martial, execution. And not just him. His family could be dragged in. His name could be erased. Bremer knew all of this. He chose surrender anyway. The farmhouse smelled of damp stone and old smoke. Outside, his adjutant, Major Otto Weiss, stood guard at the door. Inside, Bremer sat alone. He was not a young man. He had served in the First World War as a junior officer, had watched an entire generation of European men fed into machinery and come out as nothing. He had no romantic ideas about glorious death. He picked up his pen. The message he sent through intermediaries, French civilians willing to pass a letter, a chain of whispered communication across lines, reached American forward positions within 48 hours. Its content was straightforward. A German commander, 20,000 troops, willing to surrender, but with conditions. The conditions were not arrogance. They were survival. Bremer demanded 3 things. 1. His men would be treated as prisoners of war under the Geneva Conventions, not as criminals, not as war trophies. 2. The surrender would be conducted with military formality, not a rout, not a humiliation, a proper, dignified capitulation between professional soldiers. 3. His troops would not be transferred to French custody. Not because he thought the French were wrong to hate them. He understood that hatred perfectly. But because he could not protect his men from what 4 years of brutal occupation had earned. Back in Bremer's camp, not everyone shared his thinking. Colonel Dieter Knapp was one of Bremer's senior officers. A hard man, an ideological man, the kind of officer who had absorbed the doctrine of victory or death deep into his bones. When Bremer called his commanders together and told them what he intended, Knapp stood up. "You are asking us to hand ourselves over to the enemy," Knapp said. "You are asking us to become prisoners. Cowards. Traitors." Bremer looked at him for a long moment. "I am asking you," he said quietly, "to let your men go home." Knapp had no answer for that. Because every man in that room, the ideological ones, the exhausted ones, the frightened ones, every single one of them had a face they thought about when they heard the word home. When the surrender proposal reached General Marcus Hale's operational headquarters, his staff was divided. Some officers argued that accepting terms from a defeated enemy set a bad precedent. It smelled like negotiating, like giving something away that hadn't been earned. "Demand unconditional surrender," one colonel argued. "Make them come out with their hands up, nothing more, nothing less." Hale listened. He was known across the army as a man who wanted to fight, who pushed his columns harder than almost any other commander, who treated speed as a weapon and was contemptuous of caution. His reputation was built on attack, on momentum, on never giving the enemy time to breathe. What very few people knew was that he was also one of the most strategically calculating minds in the American military. He approved the surrender. Full terms. His order to his subordinates was precise. Handle this according to the laws of war. Treat German soldiers as prisoners of war. Follow the Geneva Conventions. No exceptions. No revenge. No theater. When his staff pushed back, asking why he was giving an enemy anything, Hale said something that one of his officers later wrote down. "Every German who surrenders is one I don't have to kill. Every German I don't have to kill is an American boy who gets to come home." That was the arithmetic of it. But there was a layer beneath even that calculation. Hale understood something about human behavior that most commanders never stopped to consider. Every German unit across France was watching. Every surrounded German colonel, every cut-off major, every desperate garrison commander huddled over a radio somewhere in the French countryside, they were all asking the same question. What happens to Germans who surrender to Americans? If the answer was, they get shot or beaten or handed to the French to face retribution, then those German commanders would fight. Not because they believed they could win, but because surrender offered nothing. But if the answer was, they get processed correctly, fed, treated according to military law, then those same commanders had a rational alternative to dying. Hale was not just accepting one surrender. He was setting a precedent for every surrender that would come after. Captain James Rourke was 26 years old and had been in France since June. He had seen enough by September to last several lifetimes. On the morning of September 16, 1944, he stood at a crossroads near the Lyre River and watched something he would describe in letters home for years afterward and never quite find the right words for. They came in formation. That was the thing that stayed with him. They didn't come as a mob. They didn't come staggering or running or begging. 20,000 German soldiers marched toward American lines in organized columns. Disciplined, rifles shouldered, officers at the front. At the very head of the column, General Karl Bremer. He wore his full uniform, every decoration. He had shaved that morning. He walked as though he was entering a military ceremony, not ending a career. Rourke, who had been briefed on what was happening and what he was expected to do, stepped forward to meet him. The two men looked at each other for a moment. Then Bremer removed his sidearm. He held it out, handle first. Rourke accepted it. What followed was hours of processing. 20,000 soldiers. Disarmed. Organized. Federal. Given water. Given medical care if they needed it. Treated, and this mattered enormously, treated exactly as they had been promised. Not warmly. Not as friends. As prisoners. With all the rights that status carried. Bremer watched his men being processed and later wrote that there had been a moment, standing at that crossroads, when he had wondered if he was watching them walk to their deaths. When he saw American soldiers handing out rations, when he saw the German wounded being carried to medical tents, when he saw that no one was being beaten, shot, or humiliated, he felt something he had not felt in years. Relief. Word travels fast in a collapsing army. Within days of Bremer's surrender, the story had moved through German units across France. Not through official channels, those were chaos, but through the informal networks that soldiers always maintain. The courier who had a cousin in another unit, the captured German who passed information in an interrogation room, the radio intercepts, the whispers. A German general had surrendered 20,000 men to the Americans. And everyone had been treated correctly. American intelligence officers noticed a pattern forming. When surrounded German units initiated surrender negotiations, they began specifically requesting American forces over other Allied contingents. The reason, stated plainly in captured German documents and interrogation transcripts: the Americans follow the rules. That reputation, built not on speeches or propaganda but on one September morning when 20,000 men marched forward in formation and were treated according to law, shortened the campaign in France. Not dramatically, not in ways that made headlines, but in the daily arithmetic of war. Every German who surrendered was one who didn't have to be killed, one who didn't kill an American. Multiplied across dozens of surrenders, across weeks of fighting, that arithmetic added up to something real. Karl Bremer spent the remainder of the war in an American prisoner of war camp. He was cooperative, conducted himself with military bearing, and asked for nothing beyond what his status entitled him to. He was not abused. He was not interrogated with cruelty. He was a prisoner treated as a prisoner. After the war, the German government put him on trial for surrendering his command. Under the laws that had governed the Third Reich, what he had done was treason. He was pardoned. The court recognized what any honest reading of history had to recognize, that Bremer's position had been hopeless, that continuing to fight would have killed thousands of men for no strategic purpose, and that his decision, the decision that had made him a traitor in the eyes of one regime, had been the only rational and humane choice available to him. He lived quietly in post-war Germany. He gave very few interviews, but on the occasions when he was asked about September 1944, he always returned to the same point. If I had believed the Americans would execute us, or hand us to the French for revenge, I would have felt compelled to fight. Not because I expected to win, because military honor would have demanded it. It was the fact that surrender was a real option, a dignified option, that made it possible for me to save my men. Marcus Hale is remembered for his aggression, his speed, his relentless pursuit of the enemy. All of that is true, but the decision he made on a September morning in 1944, to approve a surrender, to order his troops to follow the laws of war, to treat a defeated enemy with professional respect, that decision reveals something about him that the famous stories miss. He understood that the most powerful weapon a commander can carry is not always a tank or an artillery shell. Sometimes it's a reputation for keeping your word. 20,000 soldiers went home to their families instead of dying in the mud near the Lyre River. Some unknown number of American soldiers came home too, because they never had to fight through those 20,000 men. History rarely records that kind of math. But it's the most important kind there is. If this story found you, subscribe. We cover the decisions inside World War II that shaped the outcome in ways most history books never quite reach. The comment below: was Hale's choice military brilliance, basic decency, or both? I genuinely like to know what you think.